Hello, friends. So, this week we're continuing with talking about how to do philosophy. So last time we took a look at the technique of thought experiments, and also known as intuition pumps. So what we're going to do today is talk briefly about the relationship between the sciences and philosophy. Sorry, and every time I stare at this camera, I see the little doodad on my head. So, not that you care, but a quick explanation is that the microphone on my laptop really sucks, hence the little, headgear. Anyway, so since philosophy's earliest days, going back to some of the pre-Socratics and Aristotle, we have found a kind of dovetailing or a complementary relationship between philosophy and the sciences. In fact, Newton, for example, described himself as a natural philosopher, right? And so that was pretty common. Galileo too, right? So these were folks who saw science and philosophy as sort of continuous with one another. It's only been relatively recently that we get this sharp divide between philosophers and scientists. So for example, Neil deGrasse Tyson did an interview fairly recently where he was like, philosophy sucks, you should just do physics. Stephen Hawking is another one who said that philosophy is dead, that all of the questions that philosophers try to answer, really we're just going to answer with physics, right? And on the other side of the fence, you have a lot of philosophers who also say that, you don't need to do science, or rather that science can't give us any answers to the important questions of meaning in human existence, right? That this is the work of philosophy, and that scientists just need to get the hell out of here. So, what I'm interested in is not those, radically different camps where, somebody says, it's all philosophy, right? And then somebody says, no, it's all science. What I'm interested in is the interface between the two. So, for today, you read a couple of papers. You read one by Steve Stitch, you read another one by Stitch and Tobias, and another one, like the little blurb on brain pickings. So, I think there are three ways that we can think about the relationship between science and philosophical questions. The first, so I'm going to list all three, and then I'll give some detail about each. The first is that we can use scientific findings to inform our philosophical investigations. The second is that we can use scientific findings to answer philosophical questions. The third one is that we can use scientific methodology to get answers to philosophical questions. Right? So, science informs answers, science gives us the answers, or scientific methodology can help us get answers. So let me go through those one at a time. So the first one, that scientific findings inform our philosophical investigations. So here's an example of this. As we're going to read, Plato and Descartes both thought that the mind or the soul is a distinct substance from the body. Right, that you have the body on the one hand, and you have the mind or the soul on the other. That these were actually two different kinds of things, or literally made up of different kinds of stuff. So, a large part of philosophy of mind in the last, give or take 500 years, has built on this idea that you can describe mind without body, and body without mind. Now, recently, in the last 40 or 50 years, give or take, there's been a big push in an area of cognitive science called embodied cognition. The idea with embodied cognition is, well, as the label sounds, or as the label tells us, that minds are embodied, that you cannot understand how minds work without also having some understanding of the body's role in how the mind works. So here's an example. So this is an experiment that was done, 2000 something or other. So the researcher, right, the experimenter, took two groups of people. One group, to each group, they had them hold a pencil in their mouths. Now the one group had to hold the pencil with their teeth, right? So it looked like something like this. Just in case you need the visual there. I know you did, friend. The second group, the experimenter told these subjects to put the pencil in their mouth and to hold their lips sort of like this, right, and hold the pencil that way. So the key difference is that one group had to hold it with their teeth, and they had to pull their mouth back to hold it with their teeth. The second group had to hold it with their lips, and they had to pucker their lips in order to hold it. Now the first group, the teeth group, when they read jokes, they ranked them as funnier than the second group, right? The pursed lips group. So why is that significant? Well, it's significant because our assessments of humor seem to depend on facial expressions. So the things you find funny are going to depend on the facial expression that you currently have. And it just happens to turn out that when you're smiling, right, when you have your teeth bared and you're smiling, you tend to find things funnier than opposed to when your lips are together and pursed with teeth. Like Sebastian the Crab from The Little Mermaid, apparently. So, how is this relevant for philosophy? So it's relevant in this sense. It gives us reason to think that substance dualism, the view of mind that Descartes and that Plato endorsed, that view is wrong. Because that view tells us we can understand what a mind is without understanding the role of the body. But data like these, right, with the smiling and the teeth and the pencil, that gives us reason to think that understanding how minds work depends on some kind of grasp of the role of the body in all of this. So this is a case in which scientific findings inform our philosophical investigations, or they sort of help us out in finding philosophical answers. So a way to think about it, sort of broad way to think about it, is that when scientific findings inform our philosophical investigations, we have some concept about, the good or the true or the nature of being, what exists, stuff like that. We have a concept of those things, and then finding in the sciences are either consistent or inconsistent with that concept. So so we can think about philosophical concepts as being amenable to being informed by the sciences. So that's one. The second way of relating science and philosophy that I've said is that we can use scientific findings to answer philosophical questions. So this has happened a lot in the history of philosophy and the sciences. Namely, philosophers do, sort of natural scientists, or natural philosophers, I suppose, they do a whole bunch of thinking about a topic until they can clarify the question in such a way that it can be answered by empirical investigation. In fact, this is just what happened with Galileo, with Newton, and all of the titans of the scientific revolution. So here's a contemporary example of this. A philosopher we're going to read later on this summer is named Patricia Churchland. So Patricia Churchland is a philosopher of mind and a philosopher of neuroscience. And her position is that there is no such thing as mind, right? That mind and psychology are just bad ways of doing neuroscience. So when we get a philosophical question like, what is mind? Churchland tells us that it's a philosophical question that's going to have a scientific answer, right? So in a sense, the role of philosophy is just as a placeholder for the sciences, right? That eventually the sciences will crowd out philosophy and answer the questions that we want answered. So in that case, findings from the sciences give us an answer to our philosophical questions. Now, the third way of thinking about the relationship between science and philosophy, I said, is using scientific methodology to answer our philosophical questions. Now, this has come to be known lately as experimental philosophy, or XPhi for short. If you want, you can just Google experimental philosophy blog, and you'll see, the experimental philosophy blog, it'll give you a sense pretty quickly of some of the active research in experimental philosophy. Now, experimental philosophy branches off in two ways. The first way is that we think of experimental philosophy as largely destructive. So this is what Stitch talks about when he talks about replacing Plato's method with cognitive science. So what we do is we have we have what he calls Plato's method, right? And with Plato's method, we test a normative claim against a spontaneous judgment. And then we either stick with our claim against the spontaneous judgment, or we revise our claim to go along with the spontaneous judgment. Notice that this is what we did in the last class with our thought experiments. So again, think about Mary the neuroscientist. So we have this thought experiment where Mary's in the black and white lab. She walks out and she sees a ripe red tomato, and our intuition there is that she learns something new on seeing the bright red tomato. So that's our spontaneous judgment, that Mary learned something new. So what's the claim that goes along with the judgment? Or what's the normative claim there? Well, the normative claim is that knowing all of the physical facts about perception is knowing all of the facts about perception. And so we're led to either revise revise our claim to go along with that judgment. So revise that knowing all the facts about the visual system gives us all the facts about perception. Or we're led to somehow tweak our spontaneous judgment, right? We say perhaps Mary didn't learn something new, or she learned something new, but it's just an old fact under a new description, right? So in any case, the method is this. We have some spontaneous judgment concerning something we should or shouldn't believe. And then when our spontaneous judgment conflicts with what we should or shouldn't believe, we have to resolve that tension in some way. And so in the next video, because I'm running out of time on this, as the YouTube tells me, I'll go into detail about how experimental philosophy thinks about this particular situation. So long for now.